Hello, this is Eggbeast, and I'm now doing part 2 of my ladder sight tutorial. So we are looking at the Stoner M63A commando version weapon, and we are looking at the sights on that. And you might have seen part 1, hopefully, which is where I was actually shooting that weapon and showing you it zeroing correctly on the range. Now here we are, we're looking at the model. I'm going to show you through the model config and the weapon config, and how to actually make the axes and everything work in Object Builder, and testing them in Bulldozer. So hopefully everything will go okay. So we've got basically a front sight here, we've got a rear sight here, we've got an eye about here, and we need to kind of line them up now. So and we also need to animate them. So let's look at what we do in an edit LOD, because this helps me just to show you what I'm doing. This is the front sight post. Okay, let's view it from the left. That's our front sight post. Okay. Right, next we've got the CQB aperture, which is there. See, we're looking through that. We're looking from the side here, so we're looking through that hole. So all I did was I just grabbed that piece, put it into an edit LOD, and when I view it from the left, you can see it's just a ring. So that tells me where my CQB aperture is, and I rotated the entire weapon on the Z axis. So I used rotation tool up here, and I used Z axis, and if I just put, for example, 0.1 degree, a tiny amount, apply to all LODs, preview, you see, and that's really quite a big movement. And if I go minus 0.1, preview. So I did that until this thing lined up, until my weapon was completely lined up like that, and then we're happy. From there we can do everything. If your weapon isn't lined up between the front sight and the rear aperture, you're going to be in trouble when you come to start animating it. So we've got that sorted. If you do rotate and apply all LODs, what you need to do is go back into your memory LOD and then rotate it back in the other direction, and but not apply to all LODs, and that just puts all your memory points back completely square and flush with the deck or with the vertical, because you don't want to have rotated barrel, Usti and Connek Lavny, where your bullet's going out. Otherwise your gun's going to be off. So you've got to be a little bit careful with doing that. So so we've got what we've just seen there is it was a late night for me last night, hang on. We've got the front sight post, we've got the CQB aperture, and then we've got the entire rear sight assembly here, and then we've got some eye points which I'll come on to. That's what we're looking at. So the rear sight assembly isn't in the vertical position. You look in the weapon, it's lying down flat. See, it rotates around this kind of wheel here, and it flips up in game. So the CQB sight goes flat, and we're looking through the ladder. So that slightly difficult, because we need to know what that's going to look like when it's flipped up. So all I did was I basically obviously I'd made this as, oh yeah, let's look at the selection names. So we've got rear sight. Rear sight is just the ladder frame and the CQB assembly. Rear sight 2 in this case, it doesn't matter how you name these, but rear sight 2 is the aperture that goes up and down the ladder, and rear sight 2 rot is for me the wheeled knob. If I view it from the top, you can see it's the bit that rotates and spins round as it goes up and down. So there's three selections that we're interested in. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to make some axes. Okay, so let's view front. Oh, I don't want all of those on view. Let's get rid of those and that and that. Right, these are the only memory points we're interested in at the moment. So we've got the aim point. Okay, it's called in this case aim_point, and it is right on the front sight aperture, right on the front sight post. Okay, and that's really important. It's centered. It's completely perfectly lined up. Once you've got that lined up, that's what your bullet is going to aim at. So that's the important thing. You get that right. and then you make sure your CQB sight is going to line up. And what you do is view left. What you do is you zoom right in and you put your first eye point, I, right there on the lined up with the aim point. So the two of them are completely, I mean there might be a tiny difference between them, as you can see when you zoom right in. There actually are, you know, but we could actually do that and that. There we go. And they're better lined up. That's our 100 meters CQB lined up perfectly. There you go. Then we've got I2, sorry, I3, which is in a different position. I4, I5, I6, I7, I8, I9, I10, I11. That's as we zero, we're changing our eye. Now, how do we know where to put them? That was the thing that I was wondering about for months. Okay, view front. God, I'm blind today. Right, well, then you know they need to be behind the sight aperture, but how far back to go? Well, that's pretty much a question of taste. The way I do it is I put the eye point back a little bit, and then if we've got the ladder sight up, we're kind of like leaning in a little bit and squinting a bit more, and so I've put my ladder sight eye point slightly set forward, and that was what you saw in the other video about how the zoom, it wasn't actually the field of view. The field of view didn't zoom, it's just our eye moved forward. That's really what happened, and that means that the hole you're looking through is a bit bigger on the screen than you're looking through like a pinhole, you know. So putting your eye a bit nearer makes it a bigger hole to look through. That was the purpose for doing that. So we need to make some axes, okay, to animate. That's the next thing. So to make the rotation axis, all I do is, let's just zoom in on this. Take the innermost circle, copy it, go into your edit lod. There's one I made earlier. Paste it, right. View from top, and select points. Shift D and Shift D. Now we've now got 2 points because that merged points from each side, which happen to coincide because that was a symmetrical cylinder. When I view front, they happen to coincide and be perfectly centered right in the middle of that circle or hexagon or whatever geometry I just moved in there. So in other words, that's given us 2 points which we then right click, holding control down because we've got both points selected, new, and then I've actually made it as rear sight axis. Oh, it's not, yeah, rear sight axis, there we go. And that gives you a perfectly lined up point. Now what I do is copy that point into here, collect rear sight, the whole rear sight. Hang on, I want the whole thing. There we go. And the point, and then paste it back into your edit lod. And then so I could actually, well, I'm not going to bother doing this in real time, but it was like literally take that, take rear sight axis, whoops, there we go, and then rotate it in the Z 90 degrees, for example. Yeah. And because I'd left one in already that's in the right position, all I've got to do, I mean I'm doing this in reverse now, but is move that and put it there. So this is how it came when I pasted it in, and then if I rotate it minus 90 in this case, and then move it there, just keep doing that. And so on, and then that's pretty accurate. Okay, so that gives me my, in my edit lod, I've now got my sight set up so I can look through it. And then what I did was I took rear sight 2, which is the bit that moves. I locked the y-axis and I just literally moved it up and down until it was exactly lined up there, pretty much with the horizontal of the front sight post. Once I did that, I knew where my start point was going to be for this movement. So it's the distance between this point here and this point here, which you can read off of here, the y distance. So you can start at one, move to the other one, calculate that distance, go back into lod 1, view top. Let's just get rid of all that stuff. Hide, Control H hides. Yeah. Just get all that out of the way because it's a bit messy. Right, view top. So what I then did was just set that distance. So I grabbed that, lock the x-axis, and then you can just move it up and down until I was happy with where I wanted it. Let's say it was there. Go into view pilot because that's the view from the gunner, and then line it up. Where's it gone? Oh yeah. So we can see the lines in yellow from lod 0. There we go. So that was then lined up, and I was like, okay, I'm happy with that. That's now lined up. So that this rear sight is now, when it flips up, it is going to be, it's going to be here in this position, and that's where I want to set my I3 position to look through the aperture and be exactly lined up, and that's at 200 meters when we first flip it up. So then we're on to I4, I5, I6, I7. These are each one of zeroing, so zeroing 300, zeroing 400, zeroing 500, 600, up to 1000. But what? How do I know where to put them? Well, it's simple. You just have to go into game and basically do your zeroing and everything. But before we do that, we need to set the maximum and minimum distances that this can move, the rear sight can move. So what I did was, in lod 1, view top, what I did was I took the some points that I wanted. So I took some memory points from here and from there, and I copied them. In fact, no, I think I did it. This is how I did it. Yeah, here and here, because this is a nice cylinder. This bit's a bit tricky because you've got beveled edges. I wanted 2 points that were going to be above each other. Now when you look down here, you see I've selected 4 points, not 2. That's because it's a cylinder, so I've got the front and back of each part at the top and bottom there. So I copy those points into my edit lod and paste them. Now just to prove to you, if we do view front, we've got 4 points, you see. So let's delete those. No, sorry. Let's take those and let's go Shift D and merge them. They're now in the center of that cylinder. Shift D, they're in the center of the cylinder. That's now 1 point because it's merged the points. So we've now got 2 points, selected points 2, and they are in the center of this cylinder here. But you know, you can take my word for it because we just merged the points from the actual what was a perfectly symmetrical geometry. That would become our rear sight to axis. Although in this case I've actually moved it up and done various things. But where is my rear sight to axis? Oh yeah, here I've just rotated it, haven't I? But in my memory lod, here it is. It's the same thing, only what I've done is I've now adjusted it. So I don't want it all the way up there and all the way down there, because when I translate rear sight, it's going to move up and down that axis. But I don't want it going out of the frame and out the top or down back into the weapon. I want it just to move between 2 discrete points. So the first point and the second point. How do you set them? You use Bulldozer. So what you do is you go into Bulldozer, but I'll do that in a minute. But basically you go into Bulldozer, you animate it, and then you watch how much it moves up and down, and then you set your min and max distances between these 2 points so that it just looks good. That's the important thing. Okay, so that's kind of doing the axes, and in fact I will just switch to here. Oh yeah, no, I need to show you the what we're actually doing in the model config. I'm getting slightly confused because I did all this and recorded it, and I wasn't recording earlier, and I went through the whole thing. It's too early in the morning. So we've got basically. Let's have a look at the skeleton. Just bear with me. There we are. So we've got in the skeleton, because our weapon is part of the feed tray cover. Sorry, our sight is part of the feed tray cover. When you actually reload the weapon, you'll see the feed tray cover goes up and our rear sight goes with it. So in that case, I need the rear sight, which is the bit that flips up and down. I need that to be part of the mag feed tray cover. That's why it's a bone of the parent bone mag feed tray cover. Then rear sight 2, which is the bit that translates up and down the ladder, is part of rear sight, because when we animate rear sight and we rotate it 90 degrees, we need it to take rear sight 2 with it. We don't want to leave that stuck to the bottom of the feed tray cover. Rear sight 2 rot is the knob that rotates when we're zeroing, and that needs to be part, in this case, of rear sight 2, because it's actually it's mounted on the rear sight aperture, which goes up and down, and we want the knob to go up and down as well as rotate. And this is why we have it as its own separate bone, but as a child bone of rear sight 2. Rear sight 2 is a child bone of rear sight, and rear sight is a child bone of mag feed tray cover. Your weapon may be different, but that's basically why I've done the bones that way. If you get the bones wrong, some of the animations just won't work. So here we go. Let's go down to here, and let's have a look at how we're animating it. 3 animations. Okay, it doesn't matter what they're called. The first one is a rotation animation. Source is zeroing 1. Selection is rear sight, because we want to animate the rear sight and all of its child bones, which is rear sight 2 and rear sight 2 rot. They will all animate rotated around rear sight axis, which we made out of that cylinder by making 2 points from it. And the min value is 0 and the max value is 0.1. 0.1 means 10% of the range, of the full range that we're going to animate. So why is it 10%? Well, let's look at our config. In the config, we've got a discrete distance array in the zeroing, and we have 10 points in it between 100 and 1000. If I only had, say, 300 and 500 and 800 or something in there, I would only have 3 points, at which point this wouldn't work in the same way. We'd have to redo the numbers and do some maths to work it out, but because this is quite handily 10%, I've just got my max value at 0.1. So in other words, at 0, which is when the min value 0, when zeroing is 100 meters, we're going to use the CQB sight. We're not going to rotate the rear sight. At 0.1 of zeroing, at 200 meters in the array, we are going to animate the full amount, because we hit max value, so 90 degrees, so it flips the sight up. So at 200 meters we flip the sight up. Next we need to translate rear sight 2, which is just to show you, this bit is rear sight 2. There we go, that's rear sight 2. We need that to translate up and down. Okay, so it's a translation, and the min value is 0.1, because at 200 meters is when we start moving, not at 100 meters. That's why we don't have min value 0. And the max value is 1, because we go all the way up to 1000. We're still, that's the where we reach the apex of the animation. And the offset is 0 and 1, because basically we don't move it at the beginning, and then we move it the full amount of the axis distance. And this is why setting your axis distance is quite important, because if we lock the x-axis and move it up there, this assembly is going to move between 0 and 1. If we move it there, 0 and 1. If we move it there, 0 and 1. That's basically how they relate. So setting that distance is quite important, because it will stop. You've got to do it so that the rear sight doesn't go through the frame of the rest of the sight. So the third animation is, in this case, we just want a rotation of the knob. So it's called rearsight to rot. Rearsight to rot is, there we go. So we've got rearsight, which is the whole bit that rotates up. Its child bone rearsight 2 is basically the, let's view it from the top, is the aperture that goes up and down, and rearsight to rot is the bit that just spins round and you can see the knob turning. And basically this starts moving at 0.11. I mean 0.1 would probably be fine. I just wanted it to start moving after you start zeroing above 200. Max value 1 because it rotates all the way up there, and it doesn't have any rotation to begin with, and then by the time we get to the top it will have rotated 10 turns, so it's rad 360 times 10, 3600. That makes our wheel go round 10 times. Now let's just have a look at this in Bulldozer, and you can see the animation. So there we go. Taking a little time to get started. There's our lovely stoner weapon. Holding control down makes it move a bit slower. Yeah, okay. So let's press enter, and then we move to our 0-1 animation source. You can see in the top left corner it's cycling through the animation sources, and then backspace goes back, enter goes forward, and then holding shift down just to make this animation slow, otherwise it will go really fast. So you can see zeroing is going between 0, and you can see the values changing. When we get to 0.1 there, it's fully up, and then you'll notice as we move up the knob's rotating, and 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. So obviously we want to run this all the way up to 1, and if that pushes through the frame we've got a problem. Then we've got to go and change our axis. In fact it's going to, because I've moved that axis already. See, so if we go back and move the frame, and so what we do is oh dear, that's too far. Lock the x-axis, move it down a bit, go back to view pilot. You have to switch lods to refresh them. If you change any bones or anything like that, you have to restart Bulldozer. Anyway, so now let's look at this. But just switching between lods normally just refreshes it if you're just doing a few adjustments in angles or things like that, or in the memory lod. So now, as you see, as we go up, it just touches the top. See, so that is the aesthetic thing we have to do with setting the min and max. Now we could have said, well, look at the texture. We want the little white line on the aperture to line up with the texture on the side, the increments. That's not going to work, because look where the 2 is. It's way too low for where our aperture is. For our rear aperture is going to be right down into the weapon if we line that up on that. Not going to work. So it's very much about aesthetics. There we go. We're quite happy with that. We've tested the animation. That all works. Let me close that. Let's hope it doesn't shut down Fraps. No, it doesn't. Good, because I've been having some problems with that this morning. So we've got the animations working. Okay. Next, eye points. So view left. We're looking through the back of the weapon. So we've set our first eye point lined up in the CQB circle aperture and on the aim point, and that means we're dead shot from 100 meters. Let's just pop into the edit log to show you this, because this is now with the vertical part. Now this rear sight is going to move up and down 10% each time of your axis distance, but you can't really work that out very easily in O2. So what you do is you load it up in game, and you fire at target. Well, and you look through the target, and if you look through the target and you're looking at something like like this, where your sight post is too low in your aperture, that's because your eye point is up here somewhere. It's too high, and you're looking down through the circle to the aim point at the end. So you make a note for say this is 200 meter zeroing, move down. So you move your eye point. So you move your actual eye point down, and then when you're looking through, then when your perspective will change, and you'll be looking at this more lined up. If it's like down here, so your sight post is up towards the top, it means that your eye point's down here looking up through the hole at the sight post. So we have to then move the eye point like this, and move the eye point up, so that basically so you just literally lock the X and Y axis and move these up and down, and you just rinse and repeat until you've got all of your eye points lined up, so that they all harmonize when you're in game, and they actually look good. That's all there is to it. There's no ballistics in any of that stuff. But this is where I got confused. I thought you had to work out all the trajectories and everything. You don't. You literally just have to make sure the front sight post is animated. Is set up with your aim point, and then you set your eye points to manually. So think about it in steps. Set your aim point on your front sight post. Set your axes up for animating. Then set your beginning position of your rear ladder sight to where you want it, and then so it lines up, and then that's your beginning position, and then basically you set your axis, this is the next step, for translation, so that it doesn't clip into the frame and that you're happy with the range of movement. Once you've set this axis, you're ready to go in game and check with all the zeroing values, as this moves along this axis, is your eye point high or low, like we've just talked about. Whoops, let me just lock the axis. Is your eye point high or low for each eye point? And then if it isn't, you just adjust it up and down in O2, go back in and check again until you're happy and they all line up. And then as this moves up, your eye points move. That's all good. How you get the eye points to move? Okay, so in the config, you've got weapon info type RSC weapon zeroing. That's important, otherwise the zeroing key does nothing. Camera direction is aim point, because we're always going to be looking, center of the screen is always going to be looking at the position aim point, which is on our front sight post. Discrete distance camera point, this is where we give it our array of eye points. I3, I4, I5, it doesn't matter what you call them as long as they match the memory points in your model, like so. Okay, and then discrete distance is your array of zeroing. So some weapons are zeroed at 300 to 1200 or whatever. This one I've just done simply 100 to 1000 because it's made by Eugene Stoner and it's a very sensible weapon. Discrete distance init index is what do we start on when we first, so init is the important bit. We start on 0, which is the first item in the array, is always index 0, 100 meters. I could have put, if I put 3 in there, no, 2 in there, then we've got 0 is 100, 1 is 200, and 2 is 300. So our weapon would be zeroed at 300, like most NATO weapons, rifles and stuff, battle rifles and things. But we're in the jungle in Vietnam, so we're having 100 meters as a starting point because we're sensible. Because most brush fires happen in those kind of close quarters. And also that's where we want our CQB sight to be animated up. So you could change things and have your animation kick in at say 300 meters. That means that would be at 0, 1, 2. It would be at index point 2 in the array. It's also at that's 0.1. That's now 0.2. So when we look at the here, instead of this being 0.1, we would change that to 0.2. And then it's only going to flip up when we get to 300 meters instead of 200 meters. But we'd have to change this one as well. And by changing that, and this is quite important, once we change the rear sight axis to start moving at 0.2 instead of 0.1, we've now got a range here. Instead of, it was 0.9 because it goes between 0.1 and 1. It was 90% of the view top. It was 90% of this distance between these 2 points. It will start it will go from there to there in 90% of the movements. Sorry, there'll be 9 movements. That's what I'm trying to say. 9 movements. So it'll be 200. You're at 200. You go 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. If we make that start at 300 instead, there's only going to be 8 movements. So we've got 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. There's only 8 movements, not 9 movements. That's going to have a huge effect because your eye points here are now going to all be out of whack because you've just lined them all up perfectly, and now they're all out of whack because you've changed your zeroing values. So I'm hoping that's kind of explained why you need to be a little bit careful and get all these things set up first. Decide on how your weapon's going to be, and then go through the steps to animate it. I've probably taken too much of your time here, but hopefully that will help. And our next thing I'm going to work on is the M79 grenade launcher, and then some of the other weapons we've got, like the Arisaka rifle, because I now know how to fix them.